At 4:14 a.m., 3 Russian landing craft surged toward the Dnipro estuary, cutting the dark waters at 25 knots. Their mission was clear: deliver troops and explosives to crack open Ukraine's river defenses before sunrise. But high above, a Bayraktar TB2 circled silently at 18,000 feet. Its infrared camera picked up the faint heat of engines slicing through the waves. On Russian radar, the sky was quiet. No one realized the convoy was already being tracked. In that moment, the battlefield balanced on a knife's edge. One signal from the drone crew could turn calm seas into a storm of fire and steel. The Russians believed they were moving unseen, yet Ukraine's eye in the sky had already marked them for destruction. Was this the start of Russia's breakthrough, or the moment Ukraine would strike and shatter the myth of Russian dominance at sea? At 4:27 a.m., the Bayraktar TB2's infrared sensor picked up a heat trace moving across the surface of the Black Sea. The signal quickly resolved into the outline of a Russian CERN-class landing craft advancing toward the Dnipro estuary at approximately 25 knots. The vessel's structure, bow doors, flat deck, and capacity for both marines and explosives confirmed the threat. The data was immediately relayed to Ukraine's 383rd Unmanned Aviation Brigade. For months, Russia had regarded this coastal zone as firmly under its control. Naval patrols maintained a constant presence, supported by layered air defenses positioned along the shoreline. Central to this was the S-300 missile system, with radar arrays capable of detecting aircraft at ranges exceeding 150 kilometers and tracking multiple targets simultaneously. Supplemented by coastal surveillance radars and electronic listening posts, Moscow projected a picture of dominance. In their assessment, no Ukrainian aircraft or drone could penetrate this shield without being detected and destroyed. This assumption shaped Russian operations, allowing amphibious craft to operate under the belief of near-total protection. Ukraine, however, had adapted. The TB2 in the air at that moment was not relying on stealth alone, but on a deep understanding of Russian system limitations. Operators had mapped radar coverage zones, identifying blind sectors at low altitudes where S-300 radars struggled to track small, slow-moving targets. By flying within these gaps, the drone reduced its visibility. Its speed, around 120 knots, and composite airframe made it difficult for Russian sensors to distinguish from background clutter, especially over water, where radar returns are inconsistent. Every course adjustment was calculated to keep the TB2 inside the narrow margin between detection and safety. The drone's MX-15D electro-optical system allowed it to maintain surveillance from beyond the immediate reach of short-range defenses. From altitude, it recorded the Russian vessel's trajectory in real time without revealing its own presence. This was the product of months of study. Ukrainian crews had analyzed radar cycles, timing their flights to coincide with known lulls in Russian coverage and adjusting flight paths meter by meter. What appeared to be a gap in Russian vigilance was in fact a deliberate exploitation of predictable technical weaknesses. In the Southern Command Center, Ukrainian officers monitored the live feed. The implications were clear. If the Russian Marines reached the shoreline, they could dismantle the network of concealed observation posts, structures essential for artillery coordination, naval warnings, and troop movement control. Losing them would compromise the entire defensive system along the estuary. Yet ordering a strike would expose Ukraine's ability to operate drones deep inside what Russia considered a secure zone. A successful attack here would not only eliminate a landing craft, but also demonstrate that the S-300 shield was penetrable, with consequences that extended far beyond the immediate battlefield. The decision point was stark. To act would risk escalating Russian countermeasures, while inaction could mean the destruction of Ukraine's coastal surveillance infrastructure. The TB2 continued its track, unseen, recording the progress of the vessel below. At that hour, the balance between exposure and survival was not determined by numbers of troops or ships, but by the precision of one unmanned aircraft navigating the edge of a powerful adversary's defenses. If you were in Ukraine's command chair, Staring at that glowing silhouette, what would you choose? Strike in the dark or wait and risk everything? By 4:40 a.m., the feed from the Bayraktar TB2 was transmitted directly to Ukraine's southern command post. The infrared image of the Russian landing craft moving at high speed left little room for doubt about its mission. Intelligence reports had long warned that such vessels could be used to strike hidden observation posts near the river mouth. The arrival of 30 Marines with thermite charges would be enough to dismantle the network that supported artillery coordination and coastal defense. Commanders quickly reviewed the situation. Russian forces had built their strategy on the assumption that the Black Sea coastline was secure under the S-300 missile shield and supporting radar systems. Allowing the landing to proceed would confirm that assumption and place Ukraine at a severe disadvantage. A strike, on the other hand, would risk exposing Ukraine's ability to operate unmanned aircraft inside what Moscow considered a protected zone. The balance between tactical necessity and strategic signaling became the core of the discussion. After rapid assessment, staff officers drafted operational options and circulated them across secure channels. Plans were drawn for a single, decisive strike on the lead vessel before it could reach the shoreline. Supporting artillery and reconnaissance units were placed on alert, ensuring readiness in case the trailing craft attempted to continue the mission. The chain of command in Kiev was kept fully informed, and authorization for engagement followed soon after. At 4:45 a.m., the operation shifted from monitoring to execution. The Bayraktar TB2, still undetected above the sea, was assigned the primary role. The framework for action was clear: neutralize the threat at sea, prevent the landing, and demonstrate that even in a zone claimed by Russian air defense, Ukraine retained the ability to strike with precision. The detailed sequence of how the attack unfolded would belong to the next phase. So the question echoed in Ukraine and beyond: could a relatively cheap unmanned aircraft truly bend the balance of naval power? And if so, what would the next strike bring? At 4:48 a.m., the missile from Ukraine's Bayraktar TB2 found its mark. The MAML struck midship on the Russian CERN-class landing craft, punching through the thin armor and igniting the cargo hold in an instant. A flash lit the estuary with the intensity of a rising sun, followed by a rolling shockwave that carried across the water and rattled windows along the Dnipro's edge. Within seconds, flames consumed the vessel, fed by the crates of thermite charges stored on board. The secondary explosions tore through the craft's structure, splitting its hull and sending fragments of steel arcing into the air. What had been a fully loaded assault boat only moments earlier was reduced to a floating inferno, spilling oil and wreckage across the sea surface. For the Marines on board, there was no chance of escape. The entire craft was destroyed in less than 3 minutes. The two trailing CERN-class vessels advancing in tight formation behind the lead craft were thrown into disarray the moment the explosion erupted. For several seconds, crews froze, unsure whether the fireball ahead was a mine, an airstrike, or a catastrophic mechanical failure. Then the reality sank in. Their lead boat had been struck with precision, and the detonation of secondary charges meant total loss. On the bridges of both vessels, officers debated their options. Continuing toward the shore risked running into the same unseen threat, while retreating meant abandoning the mission. The shockwave had already buffeted their hulls, and glowing debris floated on the water around them. Instinct and survival prevailed. Engines roared to maximum output as the helmsman executed sharp turns southward, throttling back toward the relative safety of Sevastopol. In less than 2 minutes, what had been an organized 3-boat landing group had collapsed into retreat, its mission erased before it ever touched land. In Sevastopol, alarms cascaded through the naval headquarters as fragmented radio calls from the estuary arrived in rapid bursts. Distress signals, static, then silence. Operators struggled to piece together the sequence of events, but the conclusion was unavoidable. The lead vessel had been destroyed with all personnel lost, and the surviving craft were retreating at full speed. Senior officers gathered in the Black Sea Fleet's command center, their maps and operational boards still marked with the planned landing zone. The mission, designed to test Ukraine's coastal surveillance network and carve open a gap in the estuary defenses, had collapsed in under an hour. The silence in the room was heavy, not only because of the immediate loss of men and equipment, but because the strike revealed something far more dangerous. Ukraine had managed to penetrate what Moscow considered a protected zone under the S-300 missile shield. The assumption of security, the foundation of Russia's amphibious posture in the region, had been broken in a single night. In southern Ukraine, the reaction was immediate and electric. Inside the 383rd Unmanned Aviation Brigade, operators replayed the thermal footage of the strike again and again, watching the missile release, the impact, and the fireball erupting from the Black Sea. Months of patient observation, countless hours of studying Russian radar cycles, and careful exploitation of technical weaknesses had produced a decisive result in less than 5 minutes. For the officers overseeing the operation, the significance went beyond the destruction of a single vessel. It demonstrated that Ukraine's drone forces could outmaneuver advanced Russian defenses and deliver precise, lethal blows where Moscow believed itself untouchable. Reports were quickly consolidated and transmitted up the chain of command to Kiev. Military leaders framed the operation as proof that Ukraine's coastal surveillance network could be defended and that Russian amphibious threats could be neutralized before they reached the shoreline. For the soldiers manning observation posts along the riverbanks, the news was a surge of morale. The Marines they had expected to face at dawn would never arrive. Instead, the estuary remained secure and their positions intact. Beyond Ukraine, the strike drew immediate attention from Western intelligence and defense circles. By midday, select segments of the TB2's combat footage had been encrypted and shared with key partners in Washington, London, and Warsaw. Analysts scrutinized every frame, the moment of missile release, the stability of the targeting system, and the catastrophic secondary detonations inside the Russian craft. For NATO planners, the lesson was clear. A relatively inexpensive unmanned system had neutralized a high-value amphibious operation under the protection of layered Russian air defenses. The cost calculus was stark. A Bayraktar TB2 priced at roughly $5 million and a missile costing less than $100,000 had destroyed assets and personnel worth many times that figure. This disproportion underscored a growing reality in modern warfare, that precision drones could undermine traditional measures of naval strength built on hull numbers and displacement tonnage. In capitals far from the Black Sea, the event was logged not as an isolated success, but as a case study in asymmetric conflict, one that would inform procurement and doctrine for years to come. Inside Russia, the psychological effect was immediate and severe. The loss of 30 Marines and an entire landing craft in a single strike was not only a military setback, but a blow to the image of control Moscow had projected over the Black Sea. For years, state media had emphasized the strength of coastal defenses, anchored by systems like the S-300 and supported by naval patrols. Yet the events at the Dnipro estuary showed that even in areas branded as protected zones, vulnerabilities could be exploited. Within the Kremlin, the strike triggered uncomfortable discussions. If a slow-moving drone could evade advanced radars and deliver such a precise hit, what might happen against larger operations involving multiple ships? Could the Black Sea Fleet still project power along Ukraine's coastline without unacceptable risk? These questions unsettled commanders and political leaders alike, undermining confidence in a strategy built on deterrence and superiority. The aftermath revealed that Russia's dominance was no longer uncontested, and that each future operation would carry the shadow of this failure. Around the world, defense ministries tracked the incident with equal interest. In Beijing and Tehran, analysts studied the strike as evidence that even heavily defended maritime zones were vulnerable to small, precise systems. The lesson was not lost on nations seeking ways to counter superior navies. Fleets built on tonnage, armor, and layered missile defenses could be challenged by unmanned aircraft, costing a fraction of a single warship. In NATO capitals, the message reinforced ongoing debates about accelerating drone procurement and integrating unmanned platforms into naval doctrine. The Black Sea strike joined earlier precedents, such as the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict, as proof that drones were no longer supplemental tools, but central instruments of modern war. Military journals highlighted the cost-effectiveness. One missile, valued at less than $100,000, had erased a mission representing millions in training, logistics, and hardware. Beyond the statistics, however, the case illustrated a strategic shift. Naval supremacy could no longer be measured by hull numbers alone, but by the to withstand precision strikes from the air. Amid the strategic calculations, the human toll remained stark. 30 Russian Marines, trained for specialized amphibious operations, perished within minutes, their mission cut short before it began. For their families, the loss would be marked not by battlefield reports, but by silence at dinner tables and the discreet delivery of flags and medals. On the Ukrainian side, operators who executed the strike felt the weight of their success. They had accomplished what was necessary to defend their coastline, yet they understood the destruction had ended lives, not just eliminated a target. For soldiers stationed along the riverbanks, the news carried a different meaning: relief. They had braced for combat at dawn, expecting to repel Marines with superior firepower. Instead, they learned the enemy had been stopped at sea, sparing their positions and lives. The aftermath symbolized more than a tactical victory. It was proof that resilience, patience, and precision could tip the balance even against a larger, better-equipped force. The strike at the Dnipro estuary closed as a tactical event, but opened as a strategic marker. For centuries, control of the sea had been measured by fleets, tonnage, and the ability to land forces ashore. On this night, a single drone costing a fraction of a warship rewrote that calculus. The Bayraktar TB2 and its MAML payload demonstrated that technology, precision, and adaptation could outweigh raw numbers. For Ukraine, the victory validated months of preparation and strengthened its case for greater Western support. For Russia, it raised doubts about the reliability of its defenses and the survivability of its amphibious doctrine. And for military planners worldwide, the lesson was plain. The age of uncontested naval dominance was eroding under the hum of unmanned engines. The Black Sea had become a chessboard where even small, inexpensive pieces could strike decisively. What began as the loss of one landing craft now stood as proof that the balance of power could shift with a single, well-placed shot. And the question whispered across naval headquarters from Sevastopol to Brussels was this: was this just a tactical upset, or the dawn of a new age where fleets tremble before the hum of a drone's engine? By the following day, the smoke had cleared from the Dnipro estuary, but the echo of the strike still hung heavy across the Black Sea. Russia had lost a single landing craft and 30 Marines, yet the true cost ran far deeper. For 24 hours, the western coast had been free of Russian incursions. The myth of Moscow's control at sea had been punctured by a single drone's precision strike. For Ukraine, the victory was more than tactical, it was symbolic. The Bayraktar TB2 had proven that even with limited resources, innovation and nerve could tip the scales. Kyiv broadcast the message through every diplomatic channel. The era of brute force naval dominance was fading, replaced by precision, data, and unmanned eyes in the sky. For Russia, the lesson was bitter. Months of planning had been erased in 4 minutes. The strike forced commanders to reconsider their reliance on amphibious raids and raised doubts about the invulnerability of their air defense net. If a $5 million drone could dismantle a Marine landing, what would happen when swarms of drones, supported by Western intelligence, pressed deeper into the Black Sea? Strategists abroad read the battle as more than a clash between two nations. To Washington, it was proof that supporting Ukraine was reshaping the future of warfare, low-cost tools delivering outsized returns. To Beijing, it was a warning. In the next conflict, vast fleets could be humbled by swarms of unmanned hunters. To every admiral still clinging to the power of steel hulls and heavy tonnage, it was a reminder that the battlefield had already shifted beneath their feet. Yet even amid triumph, the weight of war lingered. For the Ukrainian operators who watched the explosion from 18,000 feet, the victory was laced with silence. They had defended their homeland, yes, but they had also erased 30 lives in seconds. In modern war, precision does not erase blood. It only hides it behind sterile words like target neutralized. As the world debated strategy, the people of Ukraine lived with reality. Villages along the Dnipro estuary slept a little easier that night, knowing Marines would not storm their shores. Families in Sevastopol mourned quietly, photographs turned face down, the details of the mission erased by official secrecy. One drone, one missile, and an entire operation had vanished. The strike was not just an end to a mission, it was the opening note of a new chapter in naval history. And so the question remains, in this new age, where cheap drones topple expensive fleets, who truly holds power, the nation with the biggest navy, or the one with the sharpest eye in the sky? See you next time.